Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Legion. Some very fascinating things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, it's a whole situation that obviously it's kind of interesting finally getting the other side to that situation, and that's Charles going to Morocco. And him being on that trip where he has that dream, which obviously is like, I'm so curious about that dream because obviously he dreams about like a stage performance. It's about a matador fighting and killing a bull. It's all like a stage performance. The bull's face, mask is taken off and it's Charles bleeding. And then right beside him is the yellow demonized form that, Farouk takes on. And it's like, oh, you should have never came. So it's like, who left that? Was that something he tapped into? Like when Farouk was getting in his mind, was that him kind of tiptoeing into Farouk's mind? I would assume so. Or was that something David kind of tiptoed into his brain? I'm curious about that. Because obviously it's so interesting too, because you have Farouk kind of putting on this like very welcoming performance of just like, oh my God, welcome my friend. Oh, you reached out to me, you blah, 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 I mean, it's like he taught like Charles so much. It's like, taught him about the astral plane and what you would be able to potentially do. All those kids walking around. I thought it was kind of suspicious when he was like, oh, these kids, they were orphans. I took them out. I'm like, yeah, there's definitely more to that. You're lying about that. It's like, are they real? Because at first when he says, I'm like, you killed all their parents, didn't you? But it kind of comes out later on. Well, I'm kind of skip to it. It seems like, well, for one, we end up finding out the monkey that's in the cage isn't actually a monkey. It's actually the king. There's so much to kind of break down. I'm assuming that scene with the little girl is supposed to represent all the adults that didn't, bow down to Farouk, that kind of questioned him, and like they loved their king, and so it's like, we don't love you the same way, so like to punish him he locked them in cages. And I'm assuming it's like all of them are trapped in that little girl's head because that's why she can hear the voices. That's what I was, not unless I misheard that or misinterpreted that scene. But what was interesting is also learning, like during the play, we learned, why he has the name the Shadow King, because he put on a performance of like shadow kind of puppets, essentially. Not really shadow puppets, but he would use shadow figures to represent the story of basically how he became king. But then the question then becomes, because at first he tries to paint the king as like a tyrant, but so many people have been like, he was our king. So it's like, I don't think the king was as bad as Farouk made it sound. I think Farouk was someone who's like, I have power, and he let it control him and consume him to the point that he decided to take over. I don't know, maybe the king was kind of a terrible person. It seems the way that whole thing played out made it seem more like, no, the king was kind of an okay dude, and Farouk was the tyrant who wanted power and control, And now it's so interesting that he's taking in all these kids of the parents that he banished, just because it's kind of like, well, they are young and they're malleable, so I can mold them into be whatever I want them to be. And maybe you can almost make the argument this is kind of what he did with David. He took, dealing with the parents, he takes the children in, I don't know why I said it like that. He takes the children in and kind of makes them his own, like he kind of did David. David was his babe, like inside of David's mind, he was there cradling him as a baby. So I think the same principle kind of applies in this particular situation as well. You have David and Switch, heading down the hallway. Obviously, she's losing more teeth. I thought it was such an interesting line from her being like, I'm wondering if I go the other way, if I go walk into the future, which is so interesting because that's not an angle we've even tackled. I guess that's not even something we're going to deal with because I guess we dealt with the future last season, so we're not going to deal with it this season. But it's so interesting. Like, we're only seeing like one-way ticket with her power. To be fair, who knows? Next episode, we might actually do like a one-off thing of kind of going to the future. Who knows? We'll have to see. But I like her thought of like, if I go back the other way, start going towards the future, will my teeth grow back? Because for her, it's like, I can move through time, but my body isn't strong enough yet. Okay, so I guess it's because she's still a teenager, and or a teenager, borderline young adult. I think she's still technically a teenager, but because of that, she's not fully grown and hasn't, had enough time with her powers to fully develop. I mean, I think it's like also because like she has a smaller body as a teenager. If she had an adult body, it wouldn't take the huge toll it would take on her body. Maybe it still would, but at least the toll would be at a maybe slower rate. But because she's so young, it's having a much faster rate on her body. So who knows? I just thought that was kind of like a fascinating little thing. And then as they're walking, because time is becoming very unstable, like the hallway's number starts flickering, so it's like it bounces from years to weeks to months to minutes and stuff like that. The time isn't consistent anymore. I love that because it's like, yeah, time travel is being affected by the fact that time itself is unstable, and like the time demons are running rampant, causing a whole bunch of damage. So even in the hallway, you're still not unaffected by what they're doing, to the point that David ends up getting locked up in these four walls. I'm wondering, is that supposed to be kind of like the time hallway trying to fight, keep him back? It's like, no, you need to stop before you cause even more damage. Is that what that was supposed to be? But David ends up kind of fighting his way through and ends up breaking free. At the same time all of that is happening, we have Sydney and both the Carries showing up at David. It's so interesting, like they're in the right time period. They were just in the wrong location. He's in Morocco, but the place they end up is at his home. At first, they didn't realize that. I mean, they met, Gabrielle, but they didn't know who she was until, Sydney got talking to her and it's like, wait, David, your son, wait, what did you say? And then the realization sets in. So now it becomes a situation of, what do we do? Like, I love that, obviously you got to have someone on the team who thinks like that. And in this particular case, it seems like it's Carrie who's the one that's basically doing the whole conversation. Obviously, they don't bring it up in this, but it's usually the reference when it comes to time travel. If you have the opportunity to kill baby Hitler, would you take that opportunity? Which is like, yes, in the grand scheme of things, it would be the right thing to do to a certain extent, even Sydney admits, but morally it'd be wrong because no matter what David grows up to be, we'd still be killing a baby in that regard, which is also interesting to make comparison to Hitler and David. But to be fair, like I'm sure in their eyes, that's a statement that's not too crazy because, well, David is someone that literally wipes out the world. And I was wondering about that too, because it's like, oh, is this how David ends the world because of this whole time thing? I was like, no, things kind of got reversed, but it didn't click on my head to think about, right, because the time demons are kind of loose again because of what David's doing, messing with time again. Now this is how the world is going to end. Which then begs the question, what happened in season 2, like future Sydney's time, where she was still around and kicking? Is the fact is, did things actually change, and did the way he goes about destroying the world, well, quote unquote destroying and ending the world, does it actually change, or was this always the way it happened? And maybe Sydney was like the last of humanity there. Maybe that's why they haven't really seen hide nor hair of her. Well, it'd be interesting because obviously, no, because it has to be a completely different thing now that I'm thinking about it, because the time demons are attacking on every level of time. So if that was happening, that would mean like during season 2, they would have been attacking that time. But I guess you could make the argument they hadn't gotten to that time yet. They were eating their way back. But obviously, like, they're all over the place now. So you would think, so like, it does seem like it was something different he did to destroy the world because things didn't play out the same way. Obviously, Farouk's still alive, so circumstances have changed, So I just thought that was just like a fascinating thing, which begs the question, how did he end the world originally? If that is the case, like I said, everything seems like it's set up to be like, no, things are different this time around. Regardless, I just think it's kind of a fascinating thing to think about. But getting back to the whole conversation of like, let's just kill David now as a baby. But, the whole conversation, the whole experience she had with Oliver and Melanie changed her in the point of like, they said there's some people you can save and some people you can't. Future David, she's like, present day David, adult David, he's too far gone. There's no saving him. But this baby is still innocent. We can change everything. That's what this is all about, change. If we can change the course of his life, us being here already can change everything, because that's the whole point of this whole time traveling thing. We can change things, protect his innocence, and make sure that he doesn't go down that route. But that's also the whole complicated thing about this, especially Sydney kind of, tackles into it. It's like, obviously, what David's going through isn't just like what Farouk did to him. It's a combination of having his powers, having Farouk inside of his head, but also being schizophrenic, his mom's illness passing down to him. And that's actually something Sydney was like, right, it kind of makes sense, because she never really thought about his crazy, like where it came from. But now it's like, no, it's hereditary. It's from his mom's side of the family. So now it's kind of a thing of like, even if you protect David, like, it's still not going to change. I mean, I don't know. Maybe having Farouk in his head was the final nail in the coffin. Like, maybe being a little crazy and having his powers, there's a way to manage that. Maybe. But Farouk being there drives the crazy even further. So it might have been that one extra step that ended up pushing it over the edge. So maybe just having the two, powers and his, mentally being ill, maybe that's manageable. Maybe. That might be asking too much, or so I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. Will kind of protecting David's innocence be enough? Because she even has a conversation with his mom to be like, hey, hold him, love him, make sure you give him all this love and stuff to kind of save him, because it's like, love him like his life depends on it, like all of life depends on it, which it does. But it also comes into that situation. It turns into a very interesting conversation itself. The whole big old debate, nature versus nurture. It's like in this particular situation, it seems like the nature might outshine the nurture in any shape or form. I'm also forgetting about another key element to this whole situation too. His parents aren't in his life. He was adopted, which obviously causes him some resentment, especially when he learns the truth and everything, which we never got an answer to that. What happened to his parents? Maybe in the grand scheme of things, we'll find out what exactly happened to them. Maybe what happens to them at this point is kind of what always happened to him, the reason why they're not in his life in particular. Because also, remember, when they introduced it in season 1, they showed the wheelchair. So I'm thinking maybe by that point in time when he's giving David up for adoption, he'd already been in a wheelchair because of whatever the circumstances that led to him getting in the wheelchair. Obviously, it seems like it changes from continuity to continuity. It's not always a consistent reason why he ends up in a wheelchair. First Class kind of did their own thing, but because wasn't it in the original movies, it was Gene that put him in the wheelchair? I think so, but it wasn't the case in First Class, even though that's the same continuity, but it's a timeline change. It's a whole thing in itself. It's fascinating to think about. Like I said, I keep saying that, sorry. All I'm trying to say is there's a lot that nature has to battle against nurture-wise, but I guess if you can counteract it enough, maybe it can potentially set things right. Or maybe it's a thing where it's everything is set in stone and things are always going to work out the way, just in some cosmic way, things are always going to work out to be the same way. Maybe potentially, I don't know. I don't think so, but we'll see. I did like when the time demon came and it started unbuilding everything around literally unbuilding the house. And luckily, Sydney was able to get there in time before the time demon ended up getting David. And I love the moment the time demon was dead or whatever, everything around immediately returned to the state that it was. So that was kind of pretty dope. So they're trying to get, David out of there. What's so complicated too, I kind of skipped over it, was also because of the state that his mom is in, Gabrielle was like, can I ask you a question? Are you real? That adds this whole complicated element of it's hard for a lot of that to kind of sink into her head, because it's not just David's situation you have to worry about. His mom is in a complicated situation because Charles isn't there to kind of counteract it. I mean, to be fair, we see that he comes back, but by that point, Farouk is already inside of David's head. But obviously, his wife dealing with her own particular illness, makes it kind of hard to look out for someone else, when you're kind of not sure what you're seeing and what you're hearing, whether it's real or not, so that's a whole complicated thing in itself. What I thought was pretty dope was when, David shows up and he talks to his dad and reveals hey, I'm your son. They go inside of his mind and it's taste this cake, gives him knowledge. I do love that all the knowledge he gave him was basically everything from season 1, nothing from season 2. He made sure to kind of steer away from that. It's focus on the more important stuff, because that's all the stuff that dealt directly with Farouk, why Farouk turned him into what he is. But he knew what to selectively show. And then it was the banging on the door. At first I was like, oh, is that supposed to be Switch? I was like, okay, I guess he's no, leave me alone. I gotta get this whole situation figured out. I loved what ended up happening though. They end up it's oh, here's my friend, and Farouk tries to read David's mind, but he can't, because even present day, that whole conversation came up. David's stronger than Farouk present day, and I'm assuming Farouk's maybe a little weaker in the past. Maybe he's got the same power level. Either way, but I think this shows that he is still weaker than David, regardless of what the situation may be. Whether he has the same strength present day and past, or whether he's a little weaker past, he can't get into David's mind. He tries to read David's mind, and he's hearing the music and seeing David's little cult kind of partying in his brain. That's a nice way to kind of handle that. And I love David's kind of getting all smug and enjoying it, and he's just you never should have came, and that freaks Farouk out a little bit. But David's yeah, we got him on the ropes. Lo and behold, Switch shows up, and she's in a very, very bad situation. More of her teeth have fallen out. I'm not sure at that point if it seemed like it almost looked like almost all her teeth were falling out, but maybe that's just because her mouth was so bloody that it looked like that. Obviously David's stressing, and he's not telling his dad everything. It's who's this girl? It's it doesn't matter. She's mean to an end, but he's no, everyone matters. It's knocking on all the doors, and then David freezes, and lo and behold, the door starts opening up. It's Legion. It's all the different Davids and stuff like that. And I love how that scene was executed too, because one of the Davids is we're here for revenge. The other David kind of corrects him, for justice, and he's right. Justice. And all the other doors open up, because more so than anything, it's about taking down Farouk, but it's also being pissed at your dad for being you abandoned us, you left us alone to all of this is kind of on you. And so all the doors start opening up, all the different Davids coming out. just all the daddy, and just I love that, and just like each one kind of having like that kind of deranged look on their face when they're saying it to daddy, because I think each one of them is still kind of a kid version of David who never really got to know his dad. So there's that. But Charles ends up escaping, and then he kind of learns about more about who Farouk is, and it's like, okay, we need to deal with him. And you have David being like, hey, yes, which we don't know if that's David. The Legion was talking to David to be like, hey, when it's all said and done, you need to kind of get to this. So I think that is the real David that's in control right now, maybe potentially. But his dad is like, okay, we'll deal with it the way you want to. Because at first he's like, we can talk to Farouk, just tell him what he does and then the effects it has on you and stuff like that. But David's like, no. Because obviously for David, this is about revenge. It's like, revenge, obviously he's going to say it's for justice, but it's more so than anything for revenge. This isn't about saving the world. This is about saving yourself. This is about getting revenge about the man you believe destroyed your life, that destroyed you, made you into the monster everyone sees you to be. It's like, all my problems started with you. Obviously, once again, things run deeper. Things aren't as straightforward as, like I said, season 1 made it seem like everything was so straightforward, but season 2 and now this is all added complexity to be like, maybe the problem wasn't Farouk at all. Maybe he was a symptom of something much larger at play here, which, so it's interesting in that regard. But it's like, oh, we're here together. We can stop Farouk. Like, just straight up kill him. So it's like, oh, it's two of us against him alone. The entire time there's the whole thing with Farouk, present day Farouk, in the time between time, and he vanishes, and then we see him in the painting. I was like, oh, I wonder, did he know where David was going to go, or did he track because he can track David and Switch, so I'm guessing he knew exactly what time to go to because of that, and he ends up breaking free from it, and lo and behold, there he is joining forces with himself. So it's like, it's not going to be nearly the one-sided fight that it seemed like it might have been beforehand. This is quite the situation we find ourselves in. Let's not forget, next week's episode is in fact the series finale. I have no idea how this is going to play out. I know how I want it to play out potentially, but I don't know if it's going to work out where it's like, oh, David gets to live his life and everything's fine. I think it's going to be a thing of like, when it's all said and done, like, it might be a thing where they have to put David down. Maybe they'll kill future David and things kind of get set on a path where it's like, oh, present David ends up growing up, happy and healthy. Obviously, by doing that, everything gets undone. It's going to be that time thing of like, everything we've known in the series will be undone, but maybe we'll get a look at what it's like, like some of the changes that's happened over the course of the series and this new potential timeline that gets created. Once again, the whole point I was also making is like, maybe we'll find out what happened to David's parents, like whatever happened to them at the end of all of this, whether they survive or not, in particular his mom. Like, maybe that's kind of the thing of like, this is what happened in the original timeline. Maybe it's like, oh my God, things are still playing out the way they played out before, especially because Farouk's going to try like crazy to kind of make sure things stay the way they do so they can, because you'd almost make the argument. I'm curious to see what Sid's going to do. Like, obviously, they're going to fight. Well, more so than anything, Farouk's going to join up with Farouk to make sure that they can fight and survive against Charles and David. The thing is, Charles isn't in this for full-blown revenge. He wants to stop Farouk, but I don't think he wants to go nearly as far as David does, so that's definitely going to be interesting. It might even be a situation where all three of them fight against David, and David's like, oh, of course you're going to betray me again, and he goes full-blown, maybe ends up killing his dad. I doubt it, but maybe kills one of the Farouks. I don't know. The whole question then becomes like, well, what are the Carrie's going to do? Because I'm sure he's going to be like, oh, like, this is a very interesting situation, and probably the implications of just, the effects that they'll have by doing something. I was like, oh, whether we kill David or not, like the ripples that it will cause all across the place. I'm sure that's where he's going to focus on. And I'm sure Carrie's just kind of like, where do I point my sword? Like, what do I do? What do I do? Like I said, it's so interesting because if she ends up being the one that kills present day David, let's not forget, this will be the second time she's done it. And let's not forget that Sydney has done it twice in 2 previous times before Switch went back in time and changed everything. I'm wondering, because like we haven't gotten a lot of Switch, but I'm wondering, is there going to be anything in the final episode kind of tiptoeing towards her or not, kind of dealing with some, like I said, there's been little bits about her sprinkled in, but not a lot, because I guess more so than anything, she's a part of, because at the end of the day, this has been and always will be, I guess, be David's story, and these are the other people's stories kind of mingled in there. So it'd be kind of neat to kind of get a lot about Switch in the final episode, because I think she plays the key role in all this. She makes this all possible. So whether we're having a happy ending, whether we have a sad ending, whether we have an ending in the middle, I don't know. I'm hoping for a happy ending, but I can't see this having a sad ending, and I just don't know what direction this is going to take, and I'm so excited to see where it does take us. I'm also curious about that, like, four-way battle, like, obviously the two Farouks versus David and his dad, like, what that psychic battle is going to look like. It's going to be nuts, potentially, you know? I hope we kind of get something similar to season 2, probably not as, like, music video-ish, which I don't mean that in a slight at all. I mean that in a dope way of, like, it's so cool that was like a music video, but I'm wondering if it's probably going to be a lot more serious tone-wise. I mean, that was serious too, but they added, like, obviously they went about it in a very, like, visually artistic way, you know? So I don't know if we're going to get it in that same vein, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it all happens, because the whole point is to kind of undo everything, to undo all the deaths. Like, there's been quite a few deaths these past episodes, so undoing all that, like I said, rewinding all the way back, kind of undoing the entire series. Maybe the twist is, even when you do that, it seems like everything's good, and then at the very end we see that David's still tiptoeing in that direction of being, like, almost like it was kind of futile because things are still going to work out that way. Like I said, whether things are 100% set in stone, which it doesn't seem like they are, but maybe there's just some things that are always meant to be, you know? So that brings up that question. So we'll see whether Sydney can pull it out in the end, of whether or not she can save David, if it's even possible, you know? Like I said, she's giving up on future David, but baby David, there might be hope. Like I said, I'm so excited to see what the series finale has in store for us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.